Hey there, it's the new year and I've been wanting to make a build for a while now. It's been a while since my last one for various reasons, but I'm back with a banger of a build. I felt inspired to make a build like this for months, but I finally had the time to work on it over the last month. So I will show you how I was able to make a build like this in today's video. But before we get into that, if you go on to enjoy this video, please leave a like and sub. It's greatly appreciated and lets me know you guys enjoy this video. Also, join our Discord, which is linked below. There you will be able to find out when I go live here on YouTube and on Twitch. But anyways, let's get into the video. Now the first step in all of my builds is creating a terrain map on which to build on. In real life, how any building is made will depend on the surrounding terrain. The terrain I make will always end up shaping my build in some way. For this castle, I wanted it to be in a valley, but with large mountains shaping it. For these projects, I always use World Painter because for me, it's the fastest way to make these terrain maps, and it usually comes out pretty great. In World Painter, there's an option to extend the height limit to make even larger mountains. I decided not to do that for this project, but let me know in the comment section below if I should try to do that for a future build. But I spent some time working on some large mountains, and after a while I was able to come up with this result. Now I'm sure you'll notice the mountains are a different color than what they were in the thumbnail. Well, I ended up changing that later because at this point I still hadn't decided how I was going to color the castle. So I went with a lighter color for the mountains. But since I was happy with the overall shape of the terrain, I decided it was time to move on to the actual castle. So the planning phase will be the most important part of this castle. What's going to make this castle work is the shape. If I have a badly shaped build, no matter what detailing I do, it's just not going to look good. The hardest part of this project though was deciding what to do for the initial foundation. Now I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted the castle to look like. I found this pretty cool castle image to base my overall build on. So this was going to have two parts to it. There would be a lower section with a main gatehouse along with a dock, as this was the only way to access this castle since this was in an isolated area. And the second part would be the upper area where the main castle would be. Now planning out the lower gatehouse area was pretty easy. The shape would be pretty basic. Now the difficult part was the upper area. I of course had a reference image to work off of, however it only showed one side of the build. So coming up with the other side would be difficult. So I decided to just start with what I was able to see, and then later work on the foundation shape of the other side. I went with the philosophy of just getting something down and making changes to it later. Once I was able to get something down, I was able to more clearly see how to make the rest of the build. With the foundation laid out, now I had to create the scale of all the buildings for the castle. First thing I had to do was raise the gatehouse so I had a sense of scale for everything. Once that was done, I then raised the foundation up. Of course I would make various changes to this later, but it was more about getting something down and then working off of it. After messing with the foundation for a while, I was able to just get something down. And now that I have something to work with, I can start planning the rest of the castle. This part was made pretty simple since the foundation I made didn't have many complexities. Yeah, there was this triangle shape at the front of it, but that would just be a walkway. So planning out the rest of the buildings was pretty simple. Now changes would be made here and there, but right now I'm in the just get something down phase. Take a shot of how many times I've said that. With everything laid out, it was time to create the scale of everything. After some time messing with the shapes and some color changes, I got the shapes of the walls done. It was important that I was happy with the walls since the roofs would depend on the wall shapes. So now it's on to the roofs. Now at this point, I had no idea what I was going to do for the roofs. So the easiest way to test out some designs was on the gatehouse since it was a small building. So I set up the trim first. Since this was going to involve some slabs, I decided I'd just choose a block to work with, which ended up being polished deep slate. Now originally I was going to do a cyan roof with dark prismarine, and the towers were originally going to have darker roofs than the rest of the build. So I just started with dark prismarine for them. For the coloring, I was going to try a new technique by trying to shade my build. So the rest of the roof, I used blue wool. I added some roof windows since I was testing out designs. I liked the initial look, so I decided that this will be how I did the rest of the roofs. Now it was to the upper part of the castle. I still did some playing around with the roof design to make it fit better, but now that I had a rough idea of how the roofs would look, the rest of the roofs ended up getting done pretty smoothly. And once I had all the roofs done, the castle shape started to come together really nicely. The important part about this build was how the shapes looked, and I would say it turned out pretty well. go. Now the question is how to detail this build. But as I was working on the roofs of the build, I had some help for this project. BH2 Store decided to join me for a portion of this project. What he did was work on the docks. Like I mentioned earlier, this would be the only way to access this castle, so it needed to have access to the river that flowed through the valley. With a dock, there needs to be boats. There will be 2 boats, one ship that will carry the owners of this castle, as well as any other important people that may visit this castle. Now the thing is that this boat really shouldn't be too big since this is only a river. An ocean-faring ship wouldn't be able to traverse into this valley. So something with some style, but nothing that big would be required. And the other boat would be a small fishing boat. Well, this castle is positioned on a river, so may as well use it to your advantage and do some fishing. Some details like cranes were added to the dock, and a small dock house was added for some extra storage. Though this dock is unfinished right now, I will come back to this later in the project. Now with the shape done, it's time to do some coloring. Now usually this would be a pretty quick section, but I'm trying something new for this build. A lot of my recent builds have had a flat color scheme. It's affected how eye-catching they are, and it kind of shows. So I wanted to challenge myself on this build. Try a new way of coloring and see how it changes the build. So I started with the foundations. This would be a dark color setting the base for the rest of the build. I used a gradient of deep slate to create shading, and it came out pretty well, so I decided to use this for the rest of the build. The more interior walls would have a darker color than the accent walls to have it pop a little more. It came out fine, so I decided to continue this pattern of shading to the roofs. Now since this is a cold environment, I decided to add bits of snow to the roof. Now I didn't want to cover the roofs in snow since I wanted the color to show. Plus, the rest of the map wasn't exactly covered in snow. For the brief lore of this building, the last snowfall occurred about a week ago, so some of the snow has had time to thaw a bit. And since the roofs are fairly steep, most of the snow would be on the lower parts of the roof and around the corners. Once I had the snow placed, I colored the roofs with a cyan gradient. Now as I looked at the build more, I didn't really like how dull it looked. And I actually liked it better when the roof was blue wool. So I decided to reverse my decision and actually come up with a blue gradient for the roofs. And I feel like this makes the castle pop more. Now that I have all the coloring done, it's time to add some detailing to the walls. Looking back, I think the shading does improve the overall styling of the build. However, I think I didn't go far enough. It's a solid attempt for my first time doing something like this. However, I feel like the gradient I used was too limiting. If I want to make something more eye-catching in terms of color like one of Shovel's or Snarple's builds, I need to expand the palettes further to allow for a wider gradient. Though enough with the criticism. There's still a lot more build left to do. The last real thing to add to the castle is windows and doors. Now of course I'll be adding other things to fill up space and make it feel more alive, but that stuff will come at the end. So again, I went down to the lower gatehouse to test out some details. I had a fairly good idea of how I wanted the actual windows to look, but when it came to detailing them, that was a different task. It took a lot of time in order to figure out what I wanted to do for each window design. The tough task was finding the right balance of detail. I didn't want to over detail and make the castle feel like it's super messy, but I also didn't want to leave it bare and make it seem like it's missing something. Finding that balance took multiple attempts, but I finally got it somewhere to where I was happy with it. And then I moved on to detailing the rest of the build. Once I had an idea of how I was detailing the windows, it made it easy when it came to detailing the rest of the build. It was then just a matter of figuring out spacing and placement, but I added wrinkles here and there so it didn't all feel the same. Like this one spot where I detailed this porch area to a blacksmith building. After a lot of time placing windows everywhere, the walls of the castle were done. Now to the final stages of the project. Make this build feel more alive. Now I won't be making an interior for this build since it will probably take at least another month to finish, and unfortunately I don't have that kind of time at the moment. But there's still plenty of exterior areas to work on. Earlier on in the project, I added some small trees to the balcony area, so I based the rest of my detailing on that. A fairly clean look. In the main courtyard, I added a fountain, because of course, every fancy place has a fountain. I had some benches around, some plants, and a little bit of clutter around the blacksmith building. And since weapons and tools are made in the blacksmith area, I decided it would make sense to have a testing range. So I made a small one in the corner here. I also added some snow patches around, but not too many since there's traffic around in the courtyard. And moving to this back area, this is a servants area, so I added a little more clutter around. But I also added a small secret gathering spot in the corner here. And moving over to the dock, I decided to finish up this area. Earlier on, I added some fencing, but I also wanted to add some lighting. And to liven up the place a little bit, I added some clutter here and there, as well as some snow. Now the actual build is done. However, the area surrounding the castle is pretty bare. Let's fix that. The first thing I wanted to do was add some trees around just to add stuff around the castle. And look at what just adding a few trees around a build can do. To keep the theme of the rest of the map, I added some snow around the build. I focused the snow in areas that would be more shaded since most of the snow has melted. But the areas where the sun would shine less frequently would have more snow remaining. And with those final touches, the build is done. If you've made it this far into the video, I would like to thank you. This build will be available for download in our shop if you would like it for yourself. Now I know I haven't been able to make as many videos for this channel lately, but I hope to post a little more often in 2026. But hopefully, I'll be able to see you guys in my next video. Bye!